Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsay, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. It's not just a great song lyric to say that the children are, in fact, our future. And if we care about children and the future, we need to ensure that those children are reinforced with the best tools. Without a doubt, one of those tools would have to be self-compassion. To paraphrase a message from a SuperPsyched guest who is none other than Harvard University's Dr. Christopher Germer, self-compassion is so powerful, it can be linked to just about any good outcome. In fact, it is so non-New Agey and effective that even the US Navy SEALs use it with outstanding results. So when I learned about Wendy O'Leary and Louise Shanagher's outstanding book, Growing Self-Compassionate Children, a Family Guide for Nurturing Resiliency and Kindness, I was all in. They have written a comprehensive book full of user-friendly activities for adults to assist children in this life-changing skill. Listen in as Wendy and Louise share how to help children become more self-compassionate. Wendy O'Leary and Louise Shanagher, welcome to SuperPsyched.
Thank you so much for having us, Adam.
Thank you, Adam, for having us. We're delighted to be here.
Just for the listeners' sake, I will simply say that Louise comes to us live from Ireland. That may help you in differentiating the two voices that you will be hearing. One is straight out of Worcester, Massachusetts, or near it. And Louise is right in the heart of Ireland. So I just could not be happier to speak to the two of you about this book that I am going to say is required reading for all parents.
Oh.
And it is basically talking about growing self-compassion in children. And that is the title of the book. You can find it on Amazon, Audible as I listen to it. It's a wonderful audiobook and certainly an easy and powerful read. Let's just start right from the top. And if you could tell my listeners what self-compassion is and what it is not, and what are the realities versus the perhaps erroneous conclusions people might draw about it.
Self-compassion, and in the book, we talk about it in the way that it is described in the Mindful Self-Compassion program. And then we kind of, sort of extend that discussion. So in that program, how self-compassion is described by Kristen Neff, who's a researcher, and designed that program collaboratively with Chris Germer, who I believe you said has been on here before. They talk about it as having three primary components. So the first component is mindfulness. So in order to be kind to ourselves when things are hard, we need to realize that we're going through a hard time. We need to realize that we're in the midst of some kind of difficulty. So there's that mindfulness component. And then the second component is this common humanity, a sense of really understanding that all human beings suffer, right? We all go through difficulty, and it's part of being human, right? We all are going to experience it, and we all deserve kindness and care when we're having a hard time. Just by virtue of being, we deserve this kindness and care. And then the last piece, which I think is the piece that people most often sort of associate with self-compassion, is then there's the self-kindness. How do I offer myself that kindness and care? But I think it's really essential to know that we need to have these other components. And in a very general way to think of it is, how can I be a good friend to myself? Self-compassion is just stopping and saying, okay, if a friend was going through this, what would I say to them? How would I treat them? And often that isn't actually how we treat ourselves. So I think really important to have that basic understanding of how would we treat a friend? How would we kind of care for a friend? And can we turn that towards ourselves, which I think so often we do the opposite, right? We're so often really hard and harsh on ourselves. So for us, we really took that key piece and also highlighted then the embodied aspect of it, which I think is a really important sense. So it's not an intellectual undertaking, right? It's something that we need to feel. What does it feel like to really offer myself kindness and care in the midst of a difficult moment? So we kind of added that piece in as well.
And just to share there, Adam, you said, what is it and what is it not? And I suppose sometimes people can get a little bit mixed up between maybe self-compassion and self-esteem. And they're quite different, actually, because self-esteem is like this almost positive evaluation of the self. And it's this sense of even me doing well, or me doing well maybe in comparison to others. So there can be some social comparison with self-esteem. And I suppose the difference, how self-compassion is in comparison to self-esteem, is it's all about, I suppose, meeting ourselves exactly as we are, in our imperfection and in our difficult moments, and actually knowing that no matter what is happening in our lives, whether we're doing very well in life or whether we're struggling or whatever is arising, that we're always deserving of this kindness and care. And I think that's quite an important distinction to me as well.
I love that distinction, Louise, and I love the way you summed it up, Wendy. There are contingencies that are associated with self-esteem, and with self-compassion, there are none. You are just fully in acceptance, whereas there are extrinsic outcomes that tend to be associated with self-esteem. I feel good about myself because I did well at this, versus I am a human being and therefore deserving of my own self-kindness. And there are so many erroneous conclusions that people have drawn about self-compassion, and it's easy to describe, but hard to do. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so happy to have listened to your book, even though it's ostensibly written for children and their parents, which we'll get into in a minute. But the more exposure I get to various teachers describing self-compassion, the easier it becomes for me. And it's been very hard for me. I grew up with some rather crap advice that was well-intended from adults and authorities. And one of them was a typing teacher I had in high school who would stand in front of the class. He'd lionize this idea. I'm going to make up a name for him. I look at myself and say, Dave, you are an SOB. And I smack myself in the face. And then I come to my senses. And I was thinking, oh, that's how you do it. And I tried that. And one of my favorite questions I ask people sometimes is, what's some crap advice that you got that was well-intended that you have unlearned or you're trying to unlearn? And that was one of mine. And in your book, it certainly has helped me in that. If we could get into some of the erroneous conclusions people might draw about this lionized idea about being hard on yourself and its outcomes versus perhaps the outcomes associated with self-compassion, could you distinguish between those two possible choices and their outcomes?
Yeah, I can go ahead if you like. Yeah, so I feel like sometimes we think that we need to be hard on ourselves in order to get things done or to be productive or to achieve in the world. And that can be a big misconception around self-compassion, actually, that it's like a type of self-indulgence or that it's going to make us lazy or, we're going to be sitting around eating ice cream all day. And it's actually not that. And the research shows, I suppose, that harsh self-criticism, that can create a lot of stress for us in the body and increase cortisol. And actually, when we offer ourselves self-compassion, it supports us in so many ways, but it actually can support us to be more productive in life and also to make healthier choices, actually. Because with self-criticism, often the feeling behind that is actually fear, or there's kind of this judgment on the self, this harshness towards the self. But the feeling or the essence in self-compassion is this like genuine love, kindness, and respect for the self. It's almost like a kind of being a really loving, good parent to yourself. So when we love ourselves and when we respect ourselves and when we care for ourselves, then we're much more inclined to make healthier choices. And also we're making those choices from a loving place rather than a fearful place, because often when people are maybe self-critical, maybe around their daily habits, there's almost like a fear behind maybe the choices that they make. They might be being healthier, looking after themselves, but this kind of judgment or this harshness. With self-compassion, there's just a genuine, as we continue to develop it and cultivate it, what happens is we start to cultivate this genuine love and care for ourselves, for our bodies and our minds and our hearts. And we start to actually genuinely want to care for ourselves. whether that is, putting a hand on our heart or offering ourselves kind words, or whether that is like choosing something healthy to eat or looking after our bodies well or choosing healthier relationships. So I think that piece is quite important.
So true, Louise. Wendy, do you want to weigh in on that?
The other piece that I would just add is if you think about if we are, say, trying to achieve something, like Louise talked about healthy daily habits, or even like achieving in work, or, how we parent, whatever it might be, if we're wanting to achieve and we're doing it by being hard on ourselves, sort of the stick mentality versus the carrot, right? We're giving ourselves sort of this hard time about it. We may in the short term still achieve, but with a lot of consequences. And when we are offering ourselves kindness and care, we still want to achieve, but we want to achieve because we want what's best for ourselves. And Louise mentioned that term self-indulgent, and also that we feel like it's going to make us less motivated. There's a lot of research that people think that that's one of the things that will happen if they're self-compassionate. And yet what we know is both in the research, but also as we just sort of think it through, it makes sense that isn't it better to be motivated because we care about ourselves and we want to achieve? We're going to be motivated without those additional consequences of if we don't succeed, our whole self-worth falls apart. If everything is contingent on that success. Whereas if we're able to sort of set those goals, people who are highly ranked in self-compassion still set those high goals for themselves, just as high. But if they don't achieve, when things go wrong, as they do, because that's a part of life. And when that happens, they're not as hard on themselves. It doesn't completely kind of pull the rug out from under them. So there's less fear of failure, less performance anxiety, and there's more willingness to kind of take risks and try things that maybe you wouldn't have been willing to do before. So the research, really important to say, the research shows that those misconceptions are not true at all. The last piece I would just say is that self-compassion activates that caregiving network. So we have the fight, flight, freeze when we're giving ourselves a hard time, and we have that stress response of fight, flight, freeze, heightened anxiety. There's also the physiological impact of that and the psychological impact. When we offer ourselves kindness and care, we activate the caregiving network in our system. And that allows us to be more receptive, to be more open. And I think really important when we're talking about children, to learn. And for ourselves too, right? To learn from our mistakes. We're much more likely to learn from our mistakes when we're able to give ourselves kindness and care when we make them. We're able to learn from difficult experiences when we give ourselves kindness and care, because we know that shame shuts down those learning networks. So another really important piece, I think, with self-compassion to keep in mind.
I love that. We know that failure is the cost of doing anything well, and how we respond to that failure really makes a difference. We're more likely to get back up after a failure if we speak to ourselves in a kind tone rather than a harsh tone. And even if we do get back up with the harsh tone, how are we fueling that vehicle? Are we fueling it with fuel that is going to be good for us, or fuel that might actually be very toxic for us and those around us? I mean, imagine just succeeding beyond all measure, but fueling yourself up with such toxic thoughts that you can't enjoy it. It seems like a Greek tragedy. And as I listen to you, I also think about various other things. One of the things that Chris Germer said, I said many things, but one of them relates perfectly to what both of you have said. And that is, it's such a powerful tool that if you are a graduate student and you want to have publishable research, correlate self-compassion with just about any good outcome, and it's likely that you will have publishable results. And it also calls to mind one of the quotes that the two of you brought into your book from Carl Rogers: "When I accept myself just as I am, then I can change."
Yes.
And I just think that is right at the heart of everything you two say, and provides some justification for why the Navy SEALs even use these skills. I had the pleasure of interviewing Coach Steve Kerr of the Golden State Warriors. The 4 core values that he uses. At the top, it's competition, but then comes mindfulness. Hello. Then comes compassion and joy. And that's how he fuels his team. And I've heard from people who know how the sausage is made in that organization that apparently it is a really first-class organization, that the team is very much bonded, and to have common denominators between teammates of self-compassion rather than do it or die. And even when I smacked myself on the face, even just evoking the memory of that typing teacher, it was somewhat painful. And the two of you describe various practices throughout the book, including putting your hand on your heart in fist form and hand over, and various other postures that will help people in their practices of self-compassion. It's a really, really complete book. So I'm just once again saying to the listener, yeah, this is not optional. You need this book. So let's talk about the difference between, say, self-compassion. One of the things you talk about is, helicopter parenting and snowplow parenting. Let's say, how is infusing the room with self-compassion different from helicopter parenting and snowplow parenting?
This was something that I really wanted to bring into the book. And in particular, I think because I've seen so much of it in my work with families. And so just for the listeners to say, helicopter parenting, many people have heard of that, right? We're hovering over, waiting for something to happen so we can swoop in with our children. Snowplow parenting, we don't even wait for that. We're going to get right ahead of the situation, and we're going to push whatever problems might potentially get in the way out of the way. So I think the difference is when we are helicopter or snowplow parenting, or using any of the other coping skills that we might use as parents, the first thing I think is really important to say is we're doing that because we care for our kids. So I don't want parents to add by giving themselves a hard time. We encourage noticing what are the strategies that you might use when you're concerned about your children, and be kind and gentle with yourself, right? We've all learned these strategies in various ways, and we're doing them because we are concerned that our children can't meet the situation as it is. That said, when we're helping our children develop self-compassion, we're acknowledging the fact that sometimes things are hard. They're hard for our children. They're hard for us. So I think of that quote, that Jon Kabat-Zinn quote, right? You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. Helicopter and snowplow parenting, we're trying to stop the waves. With self-compassion, we're teaching our children how to surf. We want them to learn how to handle difficulty because difficulty is a part of life. And I am really concerned in seeing so many children feel they don't have the capacity to handle difficulties in life. So, of course, we use some discernment about when they do or don't have the skills to do that. We do sometimes need to step in and support them. However, when we can help them cultivate self-compassion, it gives them the capacity to ride those waves a little bit. And we want to be growing their capacity developmentally such that they're able to handle more and more things that life will throw at them, because difficulty is a part of life. The difficulty of experiences that we have, our emotions, and the added difficulty, and I know Louise already mentioned this, but that difficulty of being hard on ourselves, which also is an experience for children. So we encourage parents to notice if they're using these coping skills, advice giving, minimizing, there's a bunch of them, right? If we're using some of those, and go gently and kindly with yourself, but start to notice, because we want to increase our children's sense that we want to empower them, right?
Yeah.
Give them that sense of efficacy. You can handle this. So a self-compassionate response might even be, because self-compassion can be tender, but it can also have that stronger side. So it could be, this is really hard and I can handle hard things. We want to help parents help their children cultivate that sense. And snowplow and helicopter parenting kind of undermine that a little bit and go gently. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Wendy. And just to say, from my experience working with children and in a therapeutic setting, I think children find it so empowering to have these tools. And I think that's, obviously, play therapy and different, types of counseling can be so helpful for kids. But when we actually model self-compassion for them and then directly teach them the tools, children can feel really empowered. And it can be a little thing. Like, for example, I was working with a child yesterday and we have like the 3 stones of self-compassion. And the first stone being mindfulness. So like acknowledging this is difficult or this is a hard moment. The second stone, they hold it in their hand and it's common humanity, or we say noticing others for younger children. And I'm not the only one that feels like this. There's lots of other kids in school or in my class that might be having a hard time too. And then the third stone being kindness. How can I be kind to myself in this moment? How can I be a good friend to myself in this moment? How can I help myself? What do I need? And this little boy made these 3 little stones and decorated them and put like a little symbol for the 3 components. And he was so delighted with himself. And what I hear from the kids is that they bring them and they put them in their pocket or they put them in their pencil case. And then when they're in school and they're having that difficult moment, they have a tool. And that really is so empowering for children growing up. Rather than the parents kind of just trying to swoop in and try and maybe somehow take away, and we can't take away difficulty, because that's another great piece about self-compassion, is just this understanding that suffering is part of life. Having difficulties will be part of our children's lives. We can empower them and we can equip them with these tools, like a little toolkit, and that they can bring with them. So I think that word empowerment is really important.
So true. I remember the first time I knew I could not make it better for my son. The beloved goldfish had died. Now, he had this massive love for this particular goldfish.
Yeah.
Had a name and had a personality. He'd talk about him a lot of times when we were out of the house. And the goldfish died. And I realized that all I could do in that moment, I could not snowplow. I could not helicopter. I could not make it better. All I could do was be with him as he fostered his own tools. And I hugged him as he grieved. And we talked about it, but I love how both of you are basically indicating that, yes, it is a natural instinct for us as parents who care to go the helicopter or snowplow route. And we need to be self-compassionate with ourselves first, and then proceed to let them learn and perhaps facilitate the learning in some way, but without being overbearing. And there's this term in psychology, a dear listener, known as scaffolding, whereby we provide some assistance almost akin to a knee brace as the knee is healing. The knee brace is not necessarily making the knee better in and of itself, but it is causing fewer possible negative outcomes to interfere with the healing process. Your book really is just full of those tips. I was wondering if you'd be open to sharing a tip or 2 of yours from the book. Obviously, not giving the entire book away because you got to get it. It's really good. I can't say it enough. I mean, I was using some of the tips from your book just this very morning when I needed them most.
I can give a tip I find that works. I think we can do this for ourselves as adults, as parents or caregivers, and the children can do too. It works for everybody. And this sense of like imagining the kind friend, if we can think of like a person, or it could be an animal, or it could be, some kind of a creature. Sometimes it's nice for kids to think of like fairies or elves or whatever they like. But for adults, it can be the same. We could imagine it could be a being or a spiritual figure, but imagining this person and imagining they just really understand us and they really care about us. So they genuinely want the best for us. And we can imagine that they really have so much kindness and they understand our whole situation. And we might imagine what might they look like, and what might the look in their eyes be like, and what might the tone of their voice be like, what words might they say, what gestures might they give towards us. And we can really imagine this. And what I do with children is I do a little meditation like this, and then I get them to either draw this kind friend or make this kind friend. They could make it like with a puppet. They could make it with stones, decorating stones. A really nice way to make it is just with like some lollipop sticks and some wool for hair. But you can be really creative with this. And children really love it. They come up with all sorts of kind friends. They can be unicorns. They can be, dinosaurs, aliens. It's really funny. And that's really good as well. And then what I encourage them to do is think about what kind words would they say? What would this kind friend say? And it might be, I believe in you, and you matter, and all your feelings belong. And for younger kids, we might need to help them a little bit with this. And then what I'd encourage them to do is either write it out or draw pictures of what they might say. What might they suggest you do? That could be taking some breaths, putting your hands on your heart, giving yourself a hug, and maybe a kind action like getting outside, moving your body, and having a drink of water. And they could draw pictures of that. And then I encourage them to have a little bag and put these pictures in the bag of the kind words and the kind actions. And they can keep this somewhere. And then when they have a difficult moment, or they encounter something hard, or they have an uncomfortable emotion arising, they can go and visit their kind friend. And they can imagine, what might my kind friend say right now? What words might they say? What might they suggest I do? And then they can practice being that kind friend to themselves. And we can work with neuroplasticity with this. And a teacher that's been very influential for both of us, Dr. Shauna Shapiro, was part of our book launch course. And her famous TED talk is "What we practice grows stronger." So we're working with this piece around neuroplasticity and coming back and, visiting the kind friend and maybe making a few different kind friends. And in the book, we also talk about the kindness kingdom, where they make a kingdom and have all sorts of kind friends in there. Because with self-compassion, there's kind of a spectrum of qualities of kindness. And Kristen Neff talks about the yin of self-compassion and the yang of self-compassion. The yin being kind of this soft, soothing, comforting quality, and the yang being more motivating, providing and protecting qualities like, I can do it, or the cheerleader or the coach. And they can have different friends to represent these different, I suppose, qualities or kind of essences of self-compassion and kindness. But we can also do this for ourselves. Like I've been doing this recently, and Wendy did a lovely meditation during that book launch course about, connecting to a wise, kind teacher, and then, bringing them into your heart and asking them, if they were me in this moment, what might they say or what might they do? And then seeing, can we bring this into our own practice, or how we might deal with something difficult? So I feel like that's a lovely one for all ages, from little children to teenagers to ourselves. So that's something I'd like to share.
Fantastic, Louise. Wendy, do you want to add?
As I think about, particularly from the perspective of parents, one of the reasons why this book was so important to me is these were tools that I had wished I had when my children were younger. And so I really think a lot about what would have been most important for me as a parent of young children, or my children are now adults. So, and still I use these tools because you're always a parent, right? However, I think some of the practices that I think could be really beneficial are also those sort of on the spot practices. It's really important to remember that if our child is struggling, and again, regardless of their age, we are also struggling. We're having a hard time too. So any practices that can support us in first taking care of ourselves in those moments. So some of the practices that I have found really useful and that we mention in the book is this practice of just sort of leaning back and softening the body. So when our child is having a hard time, or even when we're having a hard time, right, we tend to lean in and the body can often contract around a problem, right? Our focus narrows. So this practice of just energetically leaning the body back and inviting it to soften can be a really beneficial practice. And we can do it formally, but we can also, if we start to remember to do it and practice, and I'll say a little bit about remembering in a minute, but then it's really accessible right then and there in the moment. So that's one that I find to be really helpful. And another one, it can be helpful to practice sort of when you're not in the midst of something so that it's accessible in a moment of need, is this practice that is adapted from the Mindful Self-Compassion program that we talk about in the book as one for me and one for you. And that practice for me is probably one of my go-to practices. And so the gist of it is that if you're dealing with somebody, and this can even be for your listeners, like, yes, your children, but when you're with a friend who's having a hard time, or a partner, or the world, right? We can stop and take a breath in, thinking, what do I most need in this moment? Like right now, what do I most need? And imagine on the in breath, right? Because the breath is very soothing as it cares for us. So we take a breath in, taking in what we need. And then on the out breath, we start by just first releasing, right? Just releasing on the out breath. But as we feel we've done that self-care, on taking care of this body, heart, and mind, then on the out breath, we can imagine what they most need and offer that. And so it could be particular words like in acceptance, out strength, or love, or courage. But sometimes for me, as I now use this kind of on the spot, it's just in for me and out for you. I just know I'm giving me whatever it is I need, and I'm breathing out, offering you whatever it is that you most need. So having both those concrete things as well as, these sort of on the go, a practice that you can use. I work a lot with teachers, and I say that's something you can use right in the moment to support you. And then the last practice I just share is, and Louise talked about that kind friend with children, but even I've had adults make a little kind friend picture, because anytime we have anything that's a reminder, Sharon Salzberg said, the hardest part of mindfulness is the remembering. And so a strong encouragement to the listeners to put out little things that can help them remember. So, we have lots of different activities in the book that talk about reminders for practice, but it could be that kind friend, like even if it's just a little picture or a little clay figure or something as some kind of a reminder. And we offer lots of different ways to do reminders in the book. But I think really important, because we get so pulled into automatic pilot that what we practice grows stronger. Well, we've been practicing, sometimes reactivity and autopilot for many years. And so it takes intentionality and it takes practice. And so those reminders help us in that way. So even writing, one of the things that I used to do is just on sticky notes, even just writing one for me, one for you, or stop and take a breath, or hand on heart, whatever the practice is, be a kind friend to myself. Just putting sticky notes around the house can be a really helpful practice as well.
As you're talking, I think about the learning process in general and how it requires that we are patient with ourselves. So it's rather meta. Not only is it important for us to learn these things, but we have to be self-compassionate with ourselves as we learn self-compassion. And I love that you brought in so many things. First of all, Shauna Shapiro's idea that what we practice grows. That could be shame. We may be very well practiced in shame. And one of the things we know through Brene Brown's work and others is that if we were to put shame in a Petri dish and put on some self-compassion, the shame would go away. Many adults in our lives may have said it's shame on you, or you should feel ashamed of yourself. That doesn't usually bear great results long term. And in fact, if we practice that for years and years, we will turtle up and hide in our shells and not become our best selves, not taking the chances we ought to take, and coping with the failure that might be associated with it and or the success. So there's just so many places that I'm grateful to and for. I would want to also just kind of bring in Stan Tatkinsworth about this idea, even the title of his book, In Each Other's Care. I mean, when you say one for me, one for you, it causes me to think about this co-regulation, this fact that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, is what the old African proverb says. And so much of your book is about going far together, which I love. And I'm also grateful to the fact that, as to bring in what Louise talked about, neuroplasticity, we now know that old dogs can learn new tricks. And even if you've been practicing and growing these less than desirable qualities and coping skills over the years, we can unlearn them over time if we are self-compassionate with ourselves as we do so, because memory can be so hard. But having those little sticky notes around and having perhaps even accountability buddies to help us out might also get us across the finish line, although there is no actual line for finish. I will ask you my final miracle question.
Okay.
If each of you had the power to confer upon all humanity one skill or insight that would dramatically improve the lives of the individual as well as perhaps the people around them, because we are so connected, what would that skill or insight be? And how do you imagine it would impact the individual as well as perhaps society at large?
I really do think self-compassion. And the reason is it incorporates so many other things and it provides this foundation for so much else. I know for me, self-compassion has been completely transformational in my life. And I think if we can learn how to support ourselves through hard times, because again, we can't change what's happening externally always. And so I think having that ability to increase our capacity to be with life as it is in a kind and caring way towards ourselves, which also helps us and supports us, and we know this again in the research, to also be with others in a kind and caring way. So it diminishes a lot of the things that we see in society in terms of ways that we harm ourselves and each other. And so from that perspective of this like non-harming and well-being, I really think that self-compassion can make a tremendous difference. So I think that would be what I would say.
Beautiful. And Louise?
Yeah. Thanks, Wendy. Yeah. And we can think of, I suppose, self-compassion as bringing this kindness to ourselves when we're in pain and when we're suffering. And I'd like to maybe add, I feel like this broader term of maybe self-love, self-kindness, so that we can just really become, and this is just something that I've learned in my journey, just becoming a good friend to ourselves. It sounds very simple and it's something that we always hear, but the reality of that, it can be very difficult to do. But when we do go on that journey of befriending ourselves, as Wendy said, it doesn't take the difficulties away. There will be difficulties in life, but the path will be smoother and the path will be kinder, and we will cultivate more peace within and peace in the outside world too. And as Thich Nhat Hanh says, peace within ourselves, peace within the world. And I really do believe this with all my heart. And it's something I feel that goes beyond just the individual. I think self-kindness and self-compassion, it's so beneficial for our well-being, our mental health, our physical health. But I think there's much broader implications too for like society, for like even things, addiction issues, all these things. And even for when we think about conflict, even as we learn to embrace ourselves and particularly ourselves in those difficult moments, we're able to offer that to someone else. That's what I would say. But
Beautiful. Well, one of my favorite darkish quotes is hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
And I would also add that self-compassionate people are probably more compassionate with others. Yes. So I think that this is just what the two of you are really weaving into society is exactly what we need. It's learnable. It does require the self-compassion that we will give ourselves as we learn it and when we forget it. And just this very morning, I have this internalized Ted Lasso voice inside my head that he says, "Hey, buddy," when I'm struggling with a thing. The "Hey, buddy" prefix is very helpful to me. And that's kind of the way I would want to be hearing it from a friend. And so I imagine Jason Sudeikis' face as Ted Lasso saying something akin to that. And it's a nice little prime for me. But I think both you, Louise, and Wendy have shared various structures, both on this talk, and they are just strewn about the book in such beautiful ways. I cannot state it more thoroughly that people need to get this book. So Growing Self-Compassionate Children is the book, and get it now, folks. Thank you so much, Louise and Wendy, for joining me. And I hope to see you again one of these days soon.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you so much, Adam.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsay thanking you for listening to SuperPsyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.